We get sick and die like the beasts of the field, and nobody seems to care. If you really want to help us, send us a doctor. I'm Robert Livingstone Foster, who served in Zambia and Angola for 39, 40 years. To start with, my folks had been at Mukingi and my dad had reduced the language to writing. And he, over his 50-some years, had translated the whole Bible into that language. There was no one who was help in their sicknesses. My parents lost 2 children themselves because of illness contracted while they were in the bush. When I was born in 1924 in Zambia, I was dedicated to the Lord, and my dad and mom gave me the name of Livingstone with the prayer that I would become a missionary doctor like David Livingstone. I grew up in Collingwood, Ontario, Canada, at a home for missionaries' children. Away from my parents. I didn't see my parents for 7 years. And during that time at this missionary home, we had different missionaries come every month and talk to us about their work in various countries, some in South America, some in Asia, some in Africa. And as a result, as a young lad growing up, I was constantly made aware of the fact that the Lord is able. And I was challenged as a young fellow to give my life to the Lord. When I graduated from high school, I had thought about applying to medical school to do a pre-meds course first at the University of Toronto and then follow on with medicine. But I wrote my folks in Africa and told them that I was interested in going to university and could they help me. My dad said, "We've got no money and you're on your own." So I said, "Well, Lord, you'll have to prove to me that you are who you say you are. That if I will give my life to you, you will provide for my needs." In late August, I got word from the university that I had been accepted, but I had no money. Believing that God would undertake, I went to register at the medical school in Toronto, and I stood in a long line of students waiting till my turn came to the lady behind the desk. And when I got there, I was literally shaking because I didn't know what to say to her, because I didn't have any money, and yet I wanted to go to pre-meds. Amazingly, when my turn came, the lady said to me, "What is your name?" I said, "Robert Livingstone Foster." And she immediately turned around, looked at a table, filed some papers, and she said, "Your bill is paid." I said, "What? Who paid it?" She said, "Didn't you know?" I said, "No, I didn't know." And she said, "You won a scholarship from your high school exams, and all your fees are paid for your first year." That was a tremendous encouragement to me, to know that the Lord had ways. So the Lord knew what he was doing. And I graduated from medical school without a penny, but no debt. After all of the years of study, it was thrilling to realize that God is who he says he is. And if you give your life to him, he will take care of you. I had a letter from my dad saying, "Bob, have you ever considered becoming a doctor at Mukingi?" Said, "We've been praying for a doctor for many years, since the early 20s. When you were born, we dedicated you to the Lord for his service." So that was a pretty powerful message, and following that, I was at a missions conference, and the leader of the South Africa General Mission, as it was called in those days, was speaking, and he was telling about an interview he had with the church leaders at Mukingi. And the pastor by the name of Ezekiel said to him, "We get sick and die like the beasts of the field, and nobody seems to care." He said, "If you really want to help us, send us a doctor." I went to speak to him afterwards and said, "I'm graduating and will be ready to go after I finish my training in 2 or 3 years." So it worked out that I ended up at Mukingi and started from scratch. When I got there, people said to me, "Bob, are you really going to build a hospital?" And I said, "Yes, that's why I've come." And they immediately said to me, "How much money did you bring?" I said, "I didn't bring any." "Well, isn't that a bit stupid? How are you going to build a hospital if you didn't bring any money?" Well, I said, "I didn't come because I had lots of money. I came because the Lord said, go." 3 years later, we dedicated a 60-bed hospital at Mukingi. At least 50% of the church members came to the Lord through the medical ministry at the hospital. They marveled at the fact that they could go in sick to the hospital and come out well. And that was a wonderful thing about medicine and its effect. And when we preached and told them about the love of God and what God had done for them, then they were more ready to believe because they had seen the miracles of the medical ministry. One day, a car came roaring into the hospital, and the white man who was driving said, "Where's the doctor? My dog has bitten the lip off one of the men." So I said, "Where did this accident happen?" Oh, he said, "About 3 miles back." I said, "Why don't you go back and see if you can find this lip?" So he disappeared, and half an hour later, he came back with this African's lip rolled up in a leaf. I said to the African, "Now I want to sew your lip back in. I have to give you a little anesthetic." "Oh," he said, "I don't want an anesthetic." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to sew your lip in without an anesthetic." But he was so frightened of the anesthetic that he got off the operating table and went home. His wife met him at the door, and she said to him, "Whatever happened to you?" And he told her that he had been helping, and the dog had leapt and bitten off his lip. Well, she said, "I'm not living with a man without a lip. You go back to the hospital and get your lip sewn back in." So after lunch, he came back. I had left this man's lip on the Mayo stand in the operating room. And I suddenly looked at the Mayo stand where my instruments were and where I had left his lip, and his lip was gone. So I said to the nurse, "Do you know what happened to this guy's lip?" And she said, "No." So we called the orderly who cleans up the OR. And he said, "Oh, I threw it out in the rubbish." I said, "Do you think you can retrieve it?" We had a big rubbish pit about 6 feet deep out at the back of the hospital where everything was thrown in and dirt covered all this stuff. And he went out, and sure enough, he came back about 10 minutes later with this guy's lip. So I cleaned it up again, and I thought to myself, "Foster, you're crazy. You shouldn't sew this guy's lip back in. It's too long since the dog bit this lip off to put it back in." But seeing he had come back and we had recovered the lip, I gave him a local anesthetic and sewed his lip back in. I told him to come back in 5 days to have the sutures removed. And I was amazed to find out that his lip had taken and he was going to have a good result. About a month later, he came back to me and he said, "I want to thank you for what you've done in giving me my lip back." So I said to him, "You don't want to thank me. You need to thank God." He said, "How do you thank God?" I said to him, "You know, the psalmist told us what to do if we're really thankful. What shall I render," the psalmist says, "unto the Lord for all of his goodness to me?" And the psalmist answered his own question, and he said, "I will take the salvation that God offers me." So I said to him, "Are you really thankful for what God has done for you?" And he said, "Yes, I'm very thankful." I said, "Do you want to take the salvation that God offers you?" He said, "What does that mean?" So I explained to him what God had done through Christ to offer us eternal salvation. And that afternoon, I had the joy of leading that fellow to the Lord. And he went on and followed the Lord for many years. The twofold ministry of the Word and medicine, it was very effective in the whole missionary program in Central Africa. One of the great privileges of serving overseas is that you don't have all the rules and regulations that we have in America. When I worked in the hospital in Toronto and later in Nashville, I was greatly limited in the spiritual ministry that I could have. But in Africa, I was free. The demonstration of the love and kindness of Christian nurses and doctors is a very practical evidence to the Africans that God really loves them. One of the things that I did was not only run the hospital, but we had a number of area clinics around the hospital. One was at a neighboring mission station called Mutanda, and we had a missionary nurse there. And once a month I would go up to this station. On this day that I arrived, she had 100 patients lined up for me to see. I had a quick lunch and went up to the clinic. The first patient came in, a lady, and as I was listening to her heart, she got up from the table and she said, "I'm leaving." I said, "Lady, I haven't finished." "What do you mean you're leaving?" She laid back down on the table and I continued to listen to her heart. And I noticed that she had a lot of skip beats, extrasystoles we call it. And then, just as I was finished my exam, she sat up on the table and she says, "I'm gone." And she fled outside. And she yelled at the top of her voice, "Don't anybody go in there." I followed her outside, and I said, "What's the trouble, lady? Why do you say don't anybody go in there?" She said, "Didn't you see it?" I said, "See what?" She said, "There's a big snake in the rafter right above your head on the table." So I went back, and sure enough, there was an 8-foot mamba lying on the rafter right above the table. And this mamba was going back and forth. So I went outside. I said to the 300 people who were there, 100 patients plus their relatives, I said, "Who will go and help me fight the mamba?" There was no one replied. So I shouted again the second time, "Who will go and help me fight the mamba?" Nobody but nobody replied. So I shouted the third time, "Who will go and help me fight the mamba?" The only guy who volunteered was an old boy who had arthritis and walked with a cane. He said, "You can take my cane and hit the daylights out of that snake." Then another fellow came forward and said, "I have a spear. Take the spear and spear the snake." So I said to all the people, "You pray while I go." So they all began to pray in unison, and it was quite a crescendo of prayer that all of these people sent up to the Lord. So I felt surely the Lord will protect me. So I got a stepladder and climbed up onto the rafter 4 feet away from the mamba, where I could spear the mamba more readily. So I threw the spear, got the mamba in the middle so that its head came out. It was just missed me as I sat on the second rafter. And every time the head of the snake would come out to get me, I would try to hit it with the cane while I was holding the snake pinned to the wall with my left hand. I tried for an hour to hit that snake and knock the daylights out of it. But I never hit it once. It was so quick that it ducked every time. And I never hit it once. The evangelist would come and look in the window and see that the snake was still there and I was still on the rafter. And he would go back to the crowd and he said, "We've got to keep praying. The snake is still alive." So another crescendo of prayer would go up. And after an hour, I was tired. And I pulled the spear out, and the snake dropped to the floor. And he went away behind a cupboard. So I got down quickly and went outside. I said, "Who is willing to help me?" The guy who volunteered the cane came forward, the only one of 300 people there. He came forward and he said, "I'll help you." He said, "I'm an old boy." He said, "If I die, no problem. I know where I'm going. I've lived my life. You're young." And I said to the old boy, "All you have to do is push this cupboard against the wall and squeeze the mamba. He will try to get out when he feels the pressure of the cupboard. But your job is to hold the cupboard there with such force that he can't squeeze out." Well, he gave a great push, and the mamba shot out about 3 feet at the end of the cupboard. But he held the cupboard and the snake so that it couldn't wiggle out anymore. And because it could only go up and down, I was able to use the guy's cane to clobber the snake and drag it out. I took it outside. We had a Thanksgiving service, and I bade farewell to all the patients. I said, "I've had enough today. You go home. I'll come back next month and see you. If you need help between now and then, come to the hospital." I really thank the Lord that He kept me in that situation. The thing we learn from that is that it takes more than one to do the job. All those people prayed. Another fella helped me. And it's, you fight the Lord's battles, but you need an army of people behind you to pray. And you do need people to help you, because you can't do it alone. There still is a very big need for medical missionaries and the ministry in all of the countries of Africa. The level of care outside mission hospitals is, you wouldn't take your dog to one of these hospitals. Really, what God needs is people who will stick it out and who will show the people the love and compassion of Christ. But my concern is today that so many young people think they can go for a few weeks up to a year or two, and that's all that's required. God needs people who are committed, who will give their life, and who will serve for 30 or 40 years. We're having trouble today to find that kind of commitment on the part of young people. They think they've done their bit if they go for a short term, but it involves a lifetime that really produces the fruit. Sword and Scalpel demonstrates the sword of the Spirit, the Word of God, and the ministry of medicine. And it shows how the two work together to establish the Church of Jesus Christ. We thank God for the fruit that He gave on the good groundwork that my parents had laid in that part of the world. Every Sunday, I had services with the patients and the relatives. And over the years, many people came to know the Lord. It's a great thrill when you realize that God is at work and using you in a special way to draw people to Himself. So I've really enjoyed the ministry of preaching and sharing the gospel and teaching the Word of God. I know the Lord gave me medicine as a tool, and I've been thankful to be able to use it.